AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Welcome to the AI in Action podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus International. Today's guest is Leif Lundbaek. Leif is the CEO and founder of Xayn. Welcome to the show, Leif.
Many thanks for having me here.
Leif, let's jump straight into it. Tell us a little about your background, starting off in your career, and then how Xayn came along.
So yeah, I actually started my background more in research. So I'm a trained mathematician, and during my research career in Oxford and later also Imperial College, I met also my PhD supervisor, Professor Michael Hood, and we had kind of like a very common understanding that we wanted to kind of give also Europe in particular, like an alternative to, all the kind of like invasive structures that you will find in machine learning or in AI when it comes to extracting really data and being like extremely data hungry in a way, and collecting as much data as possible from humans and also from machines and so on. And in practice, we found that this is in many situations not really possible, especially for a union like Europe, where we have completely different values to for example, compared to, for example, to China. So, and we wanted to develop in a way a foundation or technical and a theoretical foundation to an alternative to these kind of processes, and in many aspects actually. So yeah, I mean, we started this kind of, I started really my career in academia, and back then, so that was like in 2013, 14, I didn't really even think about founding a company or so around it. So I was rather really more on the theoretical basis or mathematical basis of this. And I mean, this step by step kind of evolved because we were working also very closely with industry, and this is, I think, one of the clear advantages that, for example, also the Imperial College really brings in London, that this kind of like very close collaboration with industry partners gives you also the opportunity to kind of not only think about like some kind of like crazy algorithms or so, but to actually also try this out in practice and kind of find what is like the real world problem behind it, and how can you really solve this with not only like a theoretical basis, but also thinking about technical measures like scalability, like integration, adaptability, and how does all these kind of like practices really work in an industry scenario. And this is, I think, where step by step, through this kind of research and collaboration with really great companies like Mercedes, or later also Porsche, which also was published, for example, this led me, I would say, like step by step to kind of founding like suddenly a company because it just made sense. It wasn't really like a oh yeah, I have this plan now. It was just like I kind of like found myself in a situation suddenly, and it was like pretty interesting because, first of all, I mean, we had actually no idea because like also my co-founder, Professor Michael Hood, was more, I would say, like an academic, but we were very lucky that we had also one of my other co-founders, Felix Hamann, who was coming more from the industry side, really. And I think together we kind of figured it out relatively quickly by practice, how to really be an entrepreneur and not only like an academic. And this transitioning, I mean, was relatively rapid. I think we kind of learned a lot alongside, really, or along the way, and I mean, made heaps of mistakes, I would say. But I think this is like really part of the learning process. And well, at the end, I think it worked out very well. And so yeah, I think my career in that sense so far is like really like a mixture of academics and entrepreneurship in a way. And coming from theoretical practice to now, I mean, focusing to kind of bring them into an application. And so I'm acting in Xayn also as a product owner. So not only as a CEO, so not only thinking like strategically, but also how can I really get this into a working product. And so this is, I think, pretty interesting. Yeah, I think it's so far, I mean, I can only say really I learned a lot.
So much to talk about. Tell us about the importance of defining the problem and really understanding the problem that you're solving.
I mean, like the process of finding this problem is usually, I would say, in combination with customers or with users in a way. So I mean, I think in the first phase it's usually like in a way like vision driven. And so I mean we have like a very particular vision, but this also comes from our own experience and from the experience of our customers or users in a way. So and I mean something that well, when we started to think about how can we build a foundation or an infrastructure to overcome really privacy trade-offs in machine learning or data analytics in itself, we were actually, I mean, also thinking about this kind of problem that you will always see, or that still, I mean, you really see a lot in practice. You have really nice digital services that are all about convenience, right? So you have, starting with Google, which really personalizes your search to make it really attractive and appealing and fast, so that you have basically unique results for yourself. Or think about Netflix, basically personalizing the experience of how you or what kind of movies you really particularly like to watch, right? Or even going one step further. I mean, like in the recent discussions, we were discussing a lot about, for example, services like Instagram or especially now TikTok, which I think go like an even higher level of personalization in terms of AI, which means that basically they leverage all of the user data to such an extent that they know exactly what a user wants to see or watch, and this is, I think, a fundamental problem in itself, because I mean these kind of services think only about convenience, and obviously I mean they're very good at leveraging user data to such an extent that they can deliver such services. And then you have basically, I would say, the more nerdy approach, if you will, or the more technical approach, where people think, well, I actually don't want to give away all of my data. I don't want you to understand who exactly I am, because this gives obviously not only privacy threats, but privacy threats can become also other threats. They can become threats where companies like Facebook or ByteDance with its service TikTok can potentially influence elections. They can influence what people think, and I think this is particularly interesting because that's their core business model. Actually, when you think about personalized advertising, then it is about showing people exactly what you know they would watch, but also showing them content in order to influence them into a buying decision. But what does buying decision really mean? I mean, obviously, when it's like relatively harmless about like selling products, then that might be still okay. But when it comes to, well, buying basically the consent of users to decide about things in particular concerning democracy, then I think this becomes relatively dangerous. And I think privacy is in a way like the fundament. It's a fundamental human right, and therefore people there's a huge demand from people for alternative services, and there has been already in the recent years for all sorts of like convenience-driven services. There has been the evolution of a counterpart, which is only like a privacy-driven service. Think about Google and DuckDuckGo, for example, where basically you leave aside basically all the data tracking, you leave aside basically all the leveraging of user data to such an extent that you can make more efficient and better decisions. You can show them more relevant content. You can let them find things faster. You can basically keep them engaged in a way, what users obviously want. But if you leave all this aside, then basically you only deliver like a fundamental service without a convenience-driven service. And this is obviously something that, well, some people really want, or basically they just don't like that they have to give up their privacy. So, and if they have very strong feelings about it, they basically switch to the service. But it's unfortunately just a very low percentage of the population, because these services, unfortunately, are not really convenient, because they usually lack this level of data leverage, which usually leads to convenience. And this is a huge problem, because we see two sides of a medal, really. You see privacy-driven companies on the one side and convenience-driven companies on the other side. And we actually thought, and this is really particularly our vision in a way, how can we really overcome this kind of trade-off? Does this have to be a trade-off? Can't we just build privacy-driven products that have the same level of convenience as purely convenience-driven products? And how can we really end this trade-off? And this is where we created our technology as the basis in order to develop such products that are truly convenient and truly privacy preserving at the same time. But of course, you have to understand also the user needs when it comes to convenience to a very large degree. And we want to bring this technology basically to mainstream. We want to make privacy a mainstream fundament for all services.
Tell us a little bit about the framework, the Xaynet, to bridge the gap between privacy and convenience through AI, because the reality is most people sign up to things without actually looking at the terms and conditions, because they haven't got the time or effort. And a lot of these terms and conditions can be 3 to 6 pages in length. You'd need a proper lawyer to actually be able to go through and a fine-tooth comb. So tell us a little bit more about how you actually built out the framework, and then also the importance of that personalization.
Sure. Well, I mean, as a funny note, you should look at our terms and conditions, especially of the service that we built on top of Xaynet, which is basically a one-liner. It's basically saying, well, we don't track anything. We don't have to track anything, but we can deliver the same level of convenience. And well, Xaynet itself is an open source federated cross-device learning framework. That sounds maybe complicated, but what it basically does, well, it's also complicated what it does, but essentially what it does is that we, instead of first extracting the data from all user devices, whether this means browsers, or whether this means mobile phones, or whether this means cars, or even small devices, we basically keep all the data where it is, and rather bring the algorithm to the data first. And I mean, this sounds first like a very easy concept. I mean, why haven't you thought earlier about it? But the thing is, the realization of this kind of concept is pretty complex, because you have to deal with a lot of problems. Think about doing the algorithmics, which can mean really from simple analytics to complex machine learning and training of a new model, and doing that on a device level is first of all problematic in terms of energy consumption. You have to know the data. You have to implement more code on the user level side. So you have to make this extremely simple so that the user simply doesn't really have to, or I mean the creator of such software doesn't really have to do much. It doesn't have to understand what's basically behind it. So first of all, it means you have to do this in a very simple way. Secondly, you have to take care about, well, not all user devices being online at the same time. So you have to kind of, so you don't have an immediate consistency at all time, but you rather have to think about eventual consistency so that eventually everyone is at the same page, right? And you have to think about processing all of this information asynchronously and not basically at the same time, because you have to think about millions of devices communicating with a central unit. Because if you put the algorithmics on the device, so think about training a machine learning model on device level, you have to basically aggregate this knowledge. So you leave basically all the user data on the device level, and you rather aggregate only the knowledge. So only the locally trained models, you aggregate them into a common knowledge and then redistribute them to the devices eventually. And then you start over. And this is, and eventually basically everyone learns from each other without actually sharing the data. And I think this is a very beautiful concept, but the technical realization was extremely complex, and it took us years to actually realize that, to really implement it.
It's refreshing that you talk about that with such candor, and one line privacy document, and people should get used to that. They should get used to this type of mindset versus the other type of mindset, and the complexity that you've actually had to undergo to get to where you're at. Now, tell us a little bit more about some of the trade-offs: latency, size, performance, energy, about Edge AI.
The thing is really, I mean, you have to understand what you want to do. You can often, I mean, when you think about cloud applications, I think there's a lot of waste. There's really a lot of waste in terms of computational power, because you can just do it. And obviously on device level, you cannot perform a 48-layer BERT model, multilingual BERT model, for example, for natural language understanding. You cannot do that simply, but you can actually distill such models, or you can think about mobile versions of such models that are small enough and efficient enough to actually run on a mobile phone. And you have to think about how do you put the labeling on the device level. And this is, I think, in Edge AI, a very, very complex method. So if you only want to operate your machine learning, you don't really have to think about it so often or so much. But if you want to train also locally, which is basically the next level, then this becomes a real issue. Also, and this is, I think, one very important point to add, because this is, when it comes to federated learning, something that many people forget. Federated learning itself doesn't make anything privacy preserving, because if you just get a local model, an update of an individual user, and you see this local update in clear text, well, then it's actually pretty easy to regenerate the local data set. So we had to go even one step further, and we had to apply a partial homomorphic encryption concept in combination with federated learning, by encrypting also the local models and aggregating encrypted models by not losing also the underlying information. And this is, I think, one of the most complex cases here, because you have to do this in this very, very scalable way. So you have to scale over millions of devices. And the problem with pure homomorphic encryption is really that computations on an homomorphically encrypted data set is extremely complex and really energy consuming. So what we do is basically first performing the algorithmics on device level, and then doing the encryption, and then doing the aggregation, which is like a very efficient operation in the context of homomorphic encryption. And so this adds basically up to this kind of complexity here. However, it might sound frightening or so, and or maybe privacy is not so important for me, so I rather do this on the cloud level and so. But let me tell you also that actually we achieved a framework which is really simple to use. It's basically like integrating something like Firebase. It's integrating just an SDK, but you have to think obviously about how do you do the training, how do you do the algorithmics, and so on. And this might be a bit more complex, but it really pays off, because if you think about Europe as a complex of common values also, it will become more tough, basically, or tougher for companies to operate like they do right now, like Google operates here, like Facebook operates here. It will be very, very tough times, and you will have to spend more and more money on legal sides, really. And do you really want to do this, or do you want to rather spend more money on the technical side to get to a very, very nice fundament, and to really not only bring your customers and your consumers a nice digital service, but to deliver them also the nice feeling that their privacy is protected, and that you can actually that you have like a really nice trust between them, instead of rather throwing lawyers on problems and going into trials like Facebook is doing right now. And I think this is really this should be really like the thinking behind it.
When you have trust as the foundation of everything you do from the start, everything becomes a lot more straightforward. And we've seen that when people are creating their products with companies we recruit with day to day, when they have that as the foundation, it makes it a lot more straightforward than if it comes in near the end. And we've seen with some of the lawsuits, the costs of these are going to start to become so high that companies will have no other choice to rethink what they're looking to do. And it's fantastic to see we talk about simplicity, because things can get overcomplicated very quickly, and the end user usually has to pay for that complications because the costs associated. So I'm really really interested in terms of how the company moved from a research focused company to a product based company. You kind of talked about that pivot in terms of suddenly becoming trust into entrepreneurs and the structural change, some of the challenges around that, and probably maybe what the benefits of kind of having a strong research background, because there's probably several people listening to this podcast now who come from the strong research background and technically very, very good, but probably lack the confidence to go forward to the next stage.
Well, to be honest, I can only say to this, just do it. And I mean, obviously, I mean, there's a lot of resources that might help you, a lot of trainings, a lot of, I mean, podcasts like this. But at the end, I mean, I think you have to just figure it out yourself. You have to find it out. And I mean, think about obviously always the customer, and think about how can you, with your research and where you come from, how can you really solve a problem, and how can you make the solution of this problem understandable. And I think sometimes research or research-driven people, I think, have also like an advantage in building a product-based company. It's not only the like a disadvantage, and so that you might I don't know, that you might find yourself not being able to put something into production or so. Well, I think there's a lot of solutions to that. There is a lot of processes. There is from agile methodologies to actually getting also people that have the experience. So try to get those people, right, very quickly, that have the experience to put something from research into production. And I think on the technical level, this is very challenging, but it's doable. So don't just get only people from research. So we have, I think, like quite a good balance between 30% roughly PhDs and 70% people from a normal production-based engineering background. But also research really helps you in trying to figure out the nitty-gritty details of how to solve a particular problem, and describing that, and trying to make this understandable to people. And obviously, I mean, you have to make it also not only understandable for other researchers, but also for mainstream people. But nevertheless, I think this kind of research-driven mindset can certainly be a nice combination. And I think we also see that right now, especially in the deep tech sector, more and more companies have a nice composition of research-based people and production-based people. So the composition, I think, wins at the end. And we have kind of like ended the times where you can just like build an e-commerce company from a pure business background, and you don't really have to understand how it works and so on. But I think this really helps in solving the fundamental modern day problems right now.
Thank you, Leif. Leif, tell us a little bit about the public launch of Xayn and how more about that.
Sure. So, well, I mean, I've talked about Xaynet and how we build basically the fundament to solve this kind of trade-off between convenience and privacy for all sorts of applications. But we also wanted to go one step further, and we wanted to do this ourselves as well, because we saw that especially in the search engine market, we have really this kind of big difference between Google on the one side, which is only convenience driven and obviously has a very, very nice application in a way, and everybody uses it. And then things like, for example, DuckDuckGo on the other side, which are purely privacy driven and obviously do a very, very big effort in that. And I think we're extremely thankful to what they deliver. But we think that we want to drive basically also the mainstream adoption in terms of having a privacy-driven product that also delivers convenience. And we thought, well, why don't we create our own search engine that also combines convenience, so AI-driven convenience, with a privacy-driven fundament. So we created Xayn as the application layer of XaynNet, and as a search assistant that sits directly on your device level to personalize your search experience based on your interactions, with you having basically the full control, because you can, through simple swipe interactions, you can basically decide what goes as relevance into the AI and what goes as irrelevance into the AI. So you have basically the full control, but at the same time, your search assistant helps you to really personalize the experience of your search results. So you get basically only what is interesting to you, and you leave out what is not interesting to you in order to find better and quicker the results that you really want. And this is what we also publicly launch, and we are very, very interested what people really think of this, because we think that this is a fundamental change into what's happening before in all sorts of application areas. And there's so many of that, starting from maps, where you see, for example, Google Maps being like also a very, very convenient service, or where you see this in social networks as well. But we wanted to start really in the search engine market, because we think that this is one of the fundamental problems where AI is helping so much. It has led to Google being the dominant player in the market. But we want to also show people that for Europe, especially with our values, there is an alternative. And we want to be basically the alternative to Google for the European market, which has the same level of convenience, but privacy as the very fundament. So it sits directly on your device, all your data stays on your device, but people learn from each other automatically without even having to do anything in that on that aspect. But basically you have the full control over everything here. And this, I think, is also a very important aspect, because transparency, controllability, in combination with AI, will be, I think, also a game changer, because you already see what's happening in the US election with all of the kind of problems associated with intransparent algorithms, and with companies sitting on the data and the algorithms in order to influence basically what people see, and potentially influencing election campaigns. And this is obviously something that we cannot accept in Europe. And therefore our search engine, I think, is a very good alternative to the processes that have been happening so far.
It's a really exciting time. I personally can't wait to see the results that actually come and the adoption from that. We'll make sure to put more details on the links on our website. You've been listening to the AI in Action podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus International. Today, we've delighted to have Leif-Nissen Lundbaek, CEO and founder of Xayn, on the show today. Leif, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks a lot for your time as well. And it was an awesome conversation, I think.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.